Alpha Team report.
What's happening, Heather?
Alpha Team isn't responding.
Bravo?
Still nothing.
You lost both teams? Get a grip on this operation, Heather. That's bored. Green light the asset.
Sir, I need more time.
We have no time. Are you going to give that order or not?
Sir, please.
You're too naive to see the truth. There's no bringing in Bourne.
We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home sick. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer, the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All, and we are back on this Tuesday, May 30th, 2017. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All, coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. As always, we haven't moved. But we are still kind of messing with the times and the shows, but at least for the next few weeks, there's some personal things that are going on. Nothing bad, but that will affect the show. But at least for the next few weeks, I plan to be on Monday through Thursday, 7 to 9 Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, on the Nonpartisan Liberty for All radio or media and radio network, which runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When we are not live, you can still listen to the live stream of prior shows, and you can listen to those on Spreaker.com and NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com, and to the archives and the ones, the live shows immediately following the show on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and iTunes, as well as all our other archives. On Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote self-ownership and the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom, exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. And we are always happy to hear from you, although we don't hear from the listeners a lot. I know a lot of people listen to the archives, which is fine as long as we have listeners. I can see that now, how many people. Before I would just lump them all together, but now, well, there was a way, I guess, to differentiate, but I can clearly see the amount of listeners that listen live compared to after the broadcast. And most people, listen to it as a podcast, and that's fine. As long as they listen, it's great. But if you are listening live, don't hesitate to call in if you'd like at 702-470-7664 or via Skype at Nonpartisan Liberty for All is the username there. And be sure to check us out at NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com, which has all that information if you forget the phone number or the Skype username, or you want to email us. But it also contains links to all our social media on Facebook, Nonpartisan Liberty for All, our official page, along with a number of other pages, and the Government Police, and the network page, and our Twitter information as well. It also has a number of articles, original blog/articles that I've done over the time of the show. So be sure to check us out on our website. So tonight, one of the things, or the main thing I wanted to talk about, because most of the shows we've been doing, I haven't done a lot of shows over the last few months, unfortunately, and it really work and the, I guess, stress of that, not that my job was stressful, but just it was exhausting dealing with a lot of things, and I won't get into any details on that. We'll just leave it as what it is. So that definitely contributed to the lack of shows. And most of the shows we have done have been the shows on geopolitics and the economy with Ken Shorjan. So in a lot of those shows, I think some things came up that, and I'm not blaming anybody for this, but that mischaracterized my points of view and the points of view of the show and the network and what it's about and all of these things. Again, it wasn't intentionally or anything. I think there was some miscommunication or misunderstanding there, and that happens. So what I wanted to do tonight, especially since we haven't been on that much again in the past few months, and I apologize for that. The show, if I actually count from when I started, the 3-year anniversary was last month in April. And, I still count it from there, even though there were a couple months where maybe only one show was done or 2 shows were done in 1 month, where I usually do, in a month, if we do the 3 shows a week, and sometimes I'll miss a day here or there, but it will usually be 12 shows in a month. So I still count as doing the show for 3 years. And again, I apologize for that. We would have been over 400 episodes if I had kept to that schedule. But, again, unfortunately, things didn't go exactly the way that I wish that they did. And, I had to do what was best for me at the time. So since it's been a while since we really talked about and got into detail, if we ever really got into detail, I mean, we do when we talk about certain things, it comes up, but I don't know that I've really talked about in detail all the different aspects of the purpose of the show and what we're about, and done that all in one show. And, over the years, there's probably been different people listening, and I'm sure there are people that have, well, maybe not, who knows? I was going to say that have stuck with the show, but who knows? It could be all new people that listen now or not. And some of them may have gone back and listened to archives. Some of the archives, unfortunately, were done before we upgraded the sound, which has been, I think, 2 years now. I mean, our shitty sound wasn't for that long. It wasn't even a year. It might have been close to a year. It might have been like 9 or 10 months. And it wasn't unlistenable. It was just using Blog Talk Radio was the issue. Even when I upgraded all my equipment, I could still use Blog Talk Radio, and it didn't sound nothing like it sounds now. I mean, now it sounds totally clear, and you can tell the difference very easily. And once you hear a show, whether it was my show or somebody else's, that has that type of quality of sound, it's hard to go back. And, so it's even hard for me to go back and listen to an old show. Not that I really listen to the old shows, or even I used to listen to improve and see, ways I could improve the show and things I was doing. And I still need to do that. I still need to improve. I feel like I got to a point where I peaked and then I got worse. And that's something I should definitely go back to, is critiquing myself. And I think it's very important. And Mark Edge from Free Talk Live was one of the people who brought that up. And I was already doing that, but, that he had listened to himself. And it's something that you should do to self-critique to get better. Because no matter how good you are, you can always get better. Not that I'm saying that I'm that great or anything. I'm just saying that for the people that are, they can always get better. They can always improve on something. So I need to get back to that, but I rarely listen now to even, new shows, although in my defense, there haven't really been a lot of new shows, or if I do, I'll listen very quickly just because I wanted to check the sound and if the sound was all right on that show. So what we're going to talk about tonight is really what we're about, what we stand for, and what we believe regarding government, and the real purpose of the show, the message that I'm trying to get in detail, and the most important message overall. Of course, there's news that comes up, there's different things that happen, and different issues that we talk about and all of that. But it all goes back to, it's like branches from this main thing. And when we talk about these issues, it's in the context of government being the way it is and the way that we see it, or in this case, I see it, however you want to look at it. So from that, of course, if we're talking about an issue, that's the perspective I apply to it. And that's where every show that I do, for the most part, I think we did one show on like college football and tried to relate it to parts of it to freedom and things like that. But for the most part, every show somehow relates to that and goes back to that. And it's just a branch from the tree of government and how I see it and what I think of it. And some of it is fact, and you can sit there and try to deny it, but it's fact. And some of it is opinion, but it's more, I think, fact than opinion. The things that pertaining to government and the view of government. Now, you can disagree with, or I guess you can say, well, it has to be that way because of this or because of that or whatever. You can defend it, but for the most part, most of these things are facts. And it's just, well, the government has to do that because if they didn't, they wouldn't have money for this, or this wouldn't have, or whatever. And people can sit and make any excuses they want, just like the government being based on violence. So we'll get to that. And people want to deny that, but it's a fact. It's a fact that all governments are based on threat of force, that their laws are enforced by one thing, and it's not the people. It is people, but not the people in an all-encompassing way. It's specific people that work for government agencies. So one thing I want to mention before I get into this is all governments. Now, I tend to focus on the U.S. government, them. Now, they happen to be the most powerful government in the world. And because they are the most powerful government in the world, they're able to do what they do. And they get away with a lot of the stuff they do. And more that they're able to create the empire that they've created and control all these things and whatnot. But if it wasn't them doing it, it would be somebody else. So my point being is that in some ways the U.S. government is the worst government in the world. I would say in how they are a bully of the world. They are the biggest bully of the world. And I think, you could say that's an opinion, but it's an opinion based on a lot of information, a lot of facts. And in their defense, if they weren't the most powerful, they wouldn't be the biggest bully. Whatever government was the most powerful would. And that's pretty much how it's worked. I mean, if you go back through history, you can look at a time when England was probably the biggest bully because they were the most powerful government in the world. And, you go back to the Roman Empire or this empire or that empire, the empires slipping my mind, the Ottoman Empire or whatever empire, and they were different, I guess technically they were governments, but they were not as we know them today. But still, I mean, it was the same concept. So my issue, people that want to call me, and I'm not saying that people do, but I'm sure there's some people that want to call me anti-American because I'll talk about the U.S. military, because the U.S. military are basically mercenaries of politicians. I mean, that's what they are. And they are armies of mafias, of gangs, of the gang of the U.S. The U.S. government is a gang, but the English government is a gang, or the UK, whatever you want to, refer to it as, or the French government is a gang. They're all gangs that have taken over the world. That is a reality. Now, again, you could say that's a matter of opinion. Is it really, though? Because what is the definition of a gang or a mafia? Nobody gave anybody the authority to do anything. So let's talk about that for a minute. But before I talk about that, I do want to say I'm not going to get too much into this. I will if we have time, but I doubt that we will. One of the other things that we do, because I'm going to focus on government and more what it is than the corrupt things that it does specifically. I'm not going to talk about specific corruption. I'm going to talk about government just for what it is, for the most part. But another thing we do, of course, is expose corruption and talk about, all the corrupt things that government does, and things like false flags and their plans for the future and taking total control. Well, that we will talk about, but because that's part of what government does. But specific things that they do, that they're doing to move in that direction. I won't get too much into specifics of, okay, well, they're doing this, they're militarizing the police in preparation for a total takeover or whatnot. But a lot of people, although they don't see it to the extent that it actually is, in my opinion, think there's corruption in government. I don't think that we have a problem with people seeing corruption within government. I would say, you know, at one point Congress had like a 7% approval rating or something like that. And some of that was because of corruption. Some of it's because people want more handouts or their policies aren't in place. And later this week, I think I'm going to talk about some of these quote unquote revolutions that are going on that I call fake revolutions, because they're revolutions that will end in more government and will bring government closer to their goal. They're not revolutions about freedom and people ruling over themselves. So we'll talk about that. Even though we may agree with something being a problem, like say corporations, like they see or I wouldn't want to say they, because I don't want to make a blanket statement, but there's certain, say, activists that see corporations as an issue and think that there should be more socialism and whatnot. I see corporations as an issue because, one, it's an entity created by government, and people forget this, that government created corporations. It's a government entity, as all companies are government entities except for sole proprietorships, really, if you think about it, because you're either incorporating or limited liability. It's all government protection through laws of, you know, they can't go after your personal effects or whatever. So I think there's a problem with corporations. That's part of it, the liability, but also that's not the biggest part of it. It's the crony capitalism. It's the government passing laws to benefit certain businesses and things like that. So they're anti-capitalists. I'm talking about certain groups are anti-capitalists and see what's going on now as capitalism, which real capitalism never existed. And I don't even like the word capitalism anymore because of that. I believe in free markets, meaning that, you know, if you want to exchange goods with somebody in any currency or any way you want, then that's up to you. And that free exchange of goods, really voluntarism is what they're calling it now. For people that don't know or aren't familiar with that term. But if you want to start your own socialist commune or a co-op or whatever, you have the right to do that too. The problem is when you want to force people and you want to rob from people and have the government do it for you. So that's a whole nother topic. But I'll probably talk about that later this week or next week. But what I wanted to say is that a lot of people recognize to a certain level, like most people don't think that the government would murder a bunch of people like 9/11. They don't think, the government wouldn't do that. I don't know how they can't fathom that, or the government would even, set up the murder of anybody. I mean, the CIA does it all the time. It's a fact, and there's many unclassified documents of government murdering people in other countries, even American citizens in other countries, and everybody knows that and accepts that. Oh, but they were terrorists, so it's okay. Or a lot of the time it was innocent people. I saw a part of the Fifth Estate today just when I was getting ready, getting dressed, whatever. I've seen it before, but it just reminded me of the video where they killed like 2 reporters from Reuters and just blew up their van, and they were unarmed. And everybody, not everybody, but most people know about things like that. However, for some reason, they can't fathom or accept the fact that the government would commit something like a false flag, where they would actually kill somebody to push an agenda to get a law passed. And of course they would. And you see them talking about how politicians, I mean, how many people talk about how these politicians suck and they're corrupt and they're whatever. Oh, but they're not that. They wouldn't murder anybody. I mean, it's contradicting. They're contradicting themselves, really, because they're saying how bad they are, yet they wouldn't do this. Of course they would. So it's like you can't believe anything anymore without, looking at information, independent journalists on the internet, and then thinking about things. Does this make sense? And you can't just read a story and just believe it. And everything's controlled by government or law enforcement agencies, or 99% of news, because they're not only controlled by them because they control the media, the flow of information is controlled by them, whether you want it to be or not. Because where else do you get this information? They have the power to control that information because they're the ones that are doing it or creating it or whatever. In the case of the police, they're the ones writing the reports. They're in charge of the investigations. So they can do a lot of things to hide information. Now, sometimes you get whistleblowers and sometimes you get people that witness things that come out and actually tell the truth about them without, and some of those people get killed beforehand. And who knows how many people have been killed because they were a witness to something they weren't supposed to be. We don't know. We don't know any of that. So it's like we have to use our own cognitive ability and our thinking and our analysis as well, and common sense in a lot of cases when we look at information, as well as multiple sources and comparing them, and that's why, if we didn't have the internet, I think in a lot of ways we're fucked anyway. But I don't want to be one of those people, and I heard somebody else say this too, but I think I've said it before. Well, I've said it in a different way, but I don't want to be one of those people that when I have kids and they ask me, what I did, and when we're sitting in, if it gets to the point where it's a total government takeover and it's a martial law type scenario, not to say that, I had someone comment and say that we're basically in martial law, it's just not official. And they had, their explanation was they had a valid point, but it's not the in-your-face martial law where, you have police outside your door. And I mean, we have secret police. That they don't call them that, but what do you think fusion centers are? Or what do you think, all these things that are going on with spying and the NSA, and they're all secret. They're secret police. If we were in another country, that's what they would be called. So in a sense, you could say that, yeah, we're in martial law. We're just not aware of it, or we don't see it visually, or we don't have a cop outside our door, or the cops coming into everybody's house all the time, although they are through devices. So really, what's the difference? But that's a whole nother thing that I don't want to spend time on, and that was my point, that I don't really want to talk about the specifics of what the government's doing as opposed to government itself. But my point in this and how I got into this discussion, I guess, well, not really discussion because it's just me discussing with myself, I guess, is my point that I think we've gotten there with people seeing corruption. However, the issue is still that they think it's about the people. And what I mean by that is they think it's about the people in office. If you just get the right people. We've been hearing that since I've been alive. And now, oh, Trump, he's different and he's going to change things and whatever. Now they're putting, people like Alex Jones and intelligent people are putting, thinking that Trump is somehow different and, oh, that's why the media is attacking him and whatever. And I think it's all a fucking setup. It's all a game. It's all everything that happens is happening because they want it to. The powers that be, which is what I call them, that they want, distractions, but they want people to get behind Trump and be like, he's being attacked all the time and he's different and he's going to do this. And so those people won't be, protesting the government. They're always try to satisfy the bigger side. Like you had what happened with Bush. So they brought in Obama, and then all the people that were standing up to the war and all of these things stopped, essentially, even though Obama did the same thing. The majority of the people that were speaking out stopped because they didn't want to speak out against Obama. So it's a similar thing. But the point being that it's the institution that is the issue. And that's what I really want to communicate to people, that it doesn't matter who's in office. And it doesn't even matter the type of government you have. None of that matters. Now, granted, there's levels of freedom and there's better places to live than others. And the United States, although it's getting worse and worse, is better than a lot of other countries. But some of the reasons why it's better have more to do with the financial side than anything else, where the amount of people in poverty compared to some of what would be called third world countries and things like that, and the amount of pay or average salary or the economic status for the people, that poverty for the U.S. is nothing compared to some of these third world countries. And even people that are poor have televisions and have cell phones and, so there's other things that people don't really think about or even realize that are affecting their life. And I'm not going to get into the specifics today, but it's sad that people really are unaware or just naive or ignorant to the fact that the problem is the institution of government. Now, again, that's something you could say, it's an opinion. I'm saying the problem is the institution of government. However, if you look at things over history and you look at how things, especially recent history, how things are just, doesn't matter who's in office. It's all the same. It's all that. So if that's if different people are going in and out of government and nothing is changing in terms of freedom, then what other conclusion do you come to? That it's, I guess, one of two. You could say, well, it's the system of government because they're not following the Constitution, and that's what people will bring up as well. However, in my opinion, the Constitution in itself does not give you true freedom anyway, but even if it did, they'd ignore it like they're ignoring it now. Because if you believe that the Constitution gives you true freedom, that's fine, that's your opinion. However, why did it fail? Because obviously it failed. I don't think you can dispute that. The Constitution has been broken over and over again by people in office. So if it was so great, why did it fail? And you always hear the same answers, and people didn't do this and people didn't do that. Well, so how are you going to change that? Because you can't, meaning that, people didn't pay attention and people didn't follow, vote for the right candidates, and it's all bullshit. The problem, the system is part of the problem as well, because the system involves a government. But even if you're looking at the system, yeah, the system is all fucked up too. But the system is within a government. It's a type of government. So if you change the system, it's not going to change anything either. It will change things, but it won't give you any more freedom than you have now. Because the same thing will happen, is that when you give people the power to rule over you, and I've said this so many times, that they're going to take more and more power and control. They're going to try to take as much as possible. People that are attracted to those type of jobs, they want to rule over people. And they can deny that shit, but think about it. What do people say when they run for office? I have the best plan. I have a better plan than this person. I know what's best for the American people, blah, 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 whatever the fuck they say. It's basically, I want to rule over you and I know what's best for you. And I want the power and the control to implement it. That's what it is. And it's all bullshit. People don't look at the president and Congress and even your state government as rulers. That's what they are. What are rulers? People that make fucking rules. They're called laws. But what's the fucking difference? It's the same shit. Actually, a law is worse. Because for a lot of laws, you can be locked inside a cage. And that's what it is. It's a fucking cage. They want to call it jail. It's like you're a fucking animal inside a cage. So, as I was stating before, it's not the U.S. government. All governments are gangs, mafias, and extortionists. And the extortion part, of course, is the money they take from you. Because they take that money without consent and they do whatever they want with it. And if you don't give it to them, what will they do? They'll use force. They'll kidnap you. There is no difference between what the mafia does in terms of paid protection and what the government does in terms of paid protection. The only difference is that when it's the mafia, you know it's the mafia. And you can defend yourself against the mafia, and you're not going to go to jail. You might get killed by the mafia. They might send somebody else after you. I don't know that the mafia is that powerful anymore, and I don't want to know. I'm not trying to insult the mafia, but my point being, is that at least with the mafia, you could say no and you could fight back. And they're not going to throw you in jail for defending yourself against somebody who's trying to extort money from you. And they don't have the same power that the government has. Basically, the U.S. government, because they are the big bully, most powerful government in the world, and with all the technology, you cannot get away from them. Maybe you can, but it's not easy. And not only is it not easy, it's getting harder and harder. Like, if you think that you can just go to another country, the U.S. government influences policy in almost every country in the world, besides probably maybe Russia, China. That's probably it, because even England or the UK, meaning, you know, the group of countries that they control, they're allies, so, you know, they do things for each other or whatever. But they pretty much influence policy all over the fucking world. I mean, there might be other exceptions, but for the most part, especially if you don't have nuclear weapons. And people talk about, you know, this country wants to get nuclear weapons or that country, and they demonize people as, you know, madmen and whatever. And, you know, especially in the case of, say, Iran. If I was in Iran, or not if I was in, but the government of Iran, although I don't support them neither, but if they had nuclear weapons, they most likely wouldn't get them to use them. They would want them to deter the United States from attacking them. Because if you look at who the United States has attacked, they pretty much won't fuck with countries that have nuclear weapons. And it's almost a deterrent. It's not almost, it is a deterrent. So, and in the case of Iran, it's total bullshit anyway. From what I understand, they were trying to, it had to do, we talked about this on the show before, it had to do with the petrodollar and them selling oil and them finding a way to process their oil faster, because the U.S. wouldn't get a piece of that oil. Because you look at it, and again, I don't want to get too much into specifics about, you know, corruption and things like that, but the travel bans and things, and Saudi Arabia is never on that. Why? Because they're part of OPEC. They're the whole U.S. dollar is not based on Saudi Arabia, but is helped by Saudi Arabia, and is really, its value is really based on oil. But that's a whole nother discussion. But they have pretty much created an empire, and they've done it in a way that it's not blatant. And this will come up later in how they approach things, because the U.S. approaches things in a way unlike other governments have done, is they create this propaganda and illusions, like the illusion of freedom. and the illusion that you have a say in government. And all of these fucking illusions, like they don't have an empire. They probably have a bigger empire than anybody has ever had. But people don't think that because they don't technically control a country. It's not under U.S. rule or ownership, I guess, because people look at it that way. But it doesn't have to be. And they obviously learn that, hey, we can control these countries. And I think a lot of it was through money, started that way through loans and things like that. And one of the people that was, I think, at the forefront of that, although they might have been doing it earlier, and I've mentioned it, David Rockefeller, and I read his book, and that's what he was vice president of at, I think it was Chase Bank, where he was going into all these countries in South America and trying to loan them money. Because getting them in debt, it's control. It's just like the same way that the U.S. government wants to get everybody else in debt. That, and it, money is created by debt as well. But, when you're in debt, it's it gives, I guess, your debtors, or even just in general, it's a certain control over you, because you have to make sure that you pay those back, or I guess you can declare bankruptcy, but it puts you kind of in the control of the debtor to an extent. And that's the one thing about money, and really the only importance of money to me, really. I mean, I'm not, there's some things I like I like nice clothes, but you can get those pretty cheap and on sale and whatever. And when I say nice clothes, I don't mean like, fucking $200 shirts or something. I mean, like Tommy Hilfiger or Nautica or something, where Perry Ellis, you can get a shirt for like $25. But the reason why money is important to me is because it gives you a level of freedom, because you're forced into the system and into working in this system, and there's a control within it it's all by design, in my opinion, where, a company can fire you at any time. And if you aren't the type of person to save money and prepare for things like that, you could be screwed. I mean, people that live paycheck to paycheck, and if you don't get a severance, there's unemployment, which pays, depending on how much money you make, it pays maybe half your salary if you're lucky. I mean, the max of unemployment in Nevada is $417 a week. And that's before taxes. So, which is not a lot of money at all. Now, I don't think unemployment should exist, because I really don't think government should exist. I'll get into that in more detail a little later. But there should be, and I'm sure there is, insurance where you can buy your own private unemployment insurance that pays, a higher percentage of your wages. And if people weren't taxed, they could get that. All these things that people are taxed for, like Social Security, whether you want to call it a tax or not, it's money they're taking from you. It's extorted money. And Medicare, and basically you're just paying for other people, which is ridiculous. I mean, I don't use anything really when it comes to the government. I use the roads, of course, right? But I also pay a gas tax when I get gas and, register my car. So even though I don't think those taxes should exist, but what does that have to do with my income? Nothing. And so of all these things, what do I use out of what I pay for? Nothing. You could say the roads. And I know, what about the police? You will never see me calling the police ever unless I want to get killed. Because, that's usually what they do when you call them. Well, they don't kill everybody that calls the police, but there have been a lot of people who called the police for help and ended up dead. They don't help you. They're not there to help you. We've talked about the police a lot. So I'd rather the police just not exist, and people, same thing. You can have private security that people can hire, or you can protect yourself. I can protect myself a lot better than the police can protect me. I guarantee that. So fuck them. They're not all murderers. You can't say that because 1,400 people get shot and killed by the police. That's they get killed, actually. They get shot. I don't even know how you track that. Who knows how many. But you can't say that all are because of the amount of interactions. It's a small percentage, but it's still really fucked up, even if it's a small percentage, because you have your government that it's killing people, a lot of them unarmed, of all races. But when it comes down to it, they are all kidnappers. And I'll get to why a little later. When I go through your rights and the difference between what your rights are and what laws are. So what I'm going to do now is take a quick break. When we get back, we'll talk more about government, get into more details, talk about authority. What authority does government have and how did they get it? Basically, they have none. And things like natural law, what I think should replace government, or what I believe when it comes to government. Not believing in government, but what do I think when it comes to that? Because there is no utopia. There is no perfect situations. And noncompliance and self-defense. We'll also talk about that and more. And if you'd like to call in, number is 702-470. I forgot my own number because I haven't done the show in so long. So let me look that up real quick. You can also go to check out our website, nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, and that will give you all that information. 702-470-7664, 702-470-7664, or you can Skype in, just send a friend request, and we can connect you that way. There's also a chat room in Spreaker, so if you go to Spreaker, or if you're listening on Spreaker and you type something in the chat, I'll see it. I'm not staring right at the chat. It's kind of at an angle. Because I got two computers running, but it is I can see it, so I will address that. And if you go to nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, there's an email address as well, and you can email us any questions or issues or anything you'd like. So we will be right back after this. And this is actually, I've played this a lot, but this really sums up government and why they're a mafia and why they're how they a theory on how criminals became government by Brett Veinotte. I think he should have changed the name. It's called Why Libertarianism is So Dangerous. It's one of my favorite YouTube videos, but I think he could have gave it a better name. But besides that, it was done really well. So listen to that, and we'll be back after this. NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com.
Hi, my name is Brett, and I'm currently recovering from a dangerous and extreme belief system. A belief system that if I had not taken action, most likely would have landed me in jail or even a mental institution. This belief system has many names, but it is most often referred to as libertarianism. For years, I would frighten ordinary people with long rants about the non-aggression principle. That's the central ethical stance in libertarianism, which asserts that the initiation of physical force against persons or property, or the threat of such force, is inherently illegitimate, regardless of what kind of excuses somebody makes up to aggress. I know. When I hear myself say it out loud today, I realize how crazy I once was. But I've made a lot of progress. Through my exposure to new points of view and sources of information, I've realized that I was being just too optimistic about the huge group of people who live their lives peacefully and mind their own business, and too cynical about the tiny group of people who disregard these utopian notions of non-aggression, property rights, and self-ownership in order to keep us safe and maintain stability. Even though a lot of the time it does seem like they have no problem treating our communities and the entire planet like their own personal f***ing whoa. I'm sorry. Still trying to let go of some of this negative imagery. Like I said, recovery is a process. But it wasn't just the flaws in libertarian thinking, it was also the dangers. This occurred to me one day when somebody who lives in the real world asked me the question, what would you do if you woke up tomorrow and government was gone? I had never thought about it before, and at that point a terrifying worst case scenario started to play out in my mind. And before I was even halfway through this imaginative what-if scenario, things got so dark that I was forced to swear off the philosophy of liberty for good. Because of the difficult economic situation, we would have to assume that there would be a significant spike in property crime, theft, and looting. Now, libertarians might try to argue that property owners would demand protection services and somebody would quickly rise up to meet that demand. But I think things would be a little too chaotic for that. Now, imagine this: a sudden and enormous increase in violence. The first kind of violence would be property owners trying to defend what is theirs, which libertarians would argue, rightfully so, that they have a right to do. But friends, this is a worst-case scenario. So, there would also be a rise in violent crime in furtherance of theft, and things would quickly spin even more out of control. Now, libertarians might again argue at this point that whatever violence or theft is taking place would be far less than what the state was carrying out the very day before. But don't worry, my fellow non-libertarians, I'm about to make this scenario much, much worse in my imagination. Even if most people turned out to be peaceful and capable of rational thought and recognize that violence is totally impractical, there's always going to be bad people. And they would have decided, for whatever reason, that they were going to continue going around and enacting random violence on whoever they want to get whatever they need. Now, at this point, again, the libertarian would chime in and say those kinds of thugs would be drastically outnumbered by peaceful and cooperative people. But in the worst-case scenario, these violent actors wouldn't stop just because they were outnumbered. They would band together. They would carry out their violence in predation against the people in groups to increase their chances of success. And what we would have over time, maybe it would take a few weeks, maybe it would take a few months, maybe even a few years, groups of these violent marauders going around finding communities filled with peaceful and productive people getting along and living their lives, and they would go in and kill them all and take their stuff. And I can already hear the libertarians saying that is so stupid. If these violent marauders killed all the productive people, they would die off themselves. Since they don't know how to do anything besides violence, they would eventually starve or run out of resources. And that would be the end of it. But I'm one step ahead of you. See, over time, we have to assume that the marauders, the thugs, would get smarter. And after several bands of these thugs had died from starvation or lack of resources because they killed all the people who knew how to do and get all the stuff, they would realize that when they raid a village, they have to leave some productive people alive so they can come back later and take the new stuff that they made. And over time, they would actually develop even more subtle and efficient methods of exploiting their victims. Instead of roaming around or periodically going back to a village and killing more people and taking more stuff, sooner or later, they would just move in and live amongst the productive people. See, in the worst case scenario, they would be really diabolical. Instead of all this back and forth, surprise, here we are again, within a few years, people would just be used to them. And they would also get used to the fact that when they want to, these thugs are going to take their stuff. Maybe rough them up a little bit. It's getting pretty bad, isn't it, libertarians? Well, guess what? It gets worse. From the darkest corners of my fear-filled imagination comes this idea. What if these thugs, these predators, were so clever that eventually they realized that their little system could continue unabated if they just bribed the people? You see, after the thugs took everything they wanted for themselves and gave whatever they wanted to their friends, what if they just took whatever was left and offered it as kind of like a kickback to the productive people in the community? We are your masters. But if you tolerate that, maybe once in a while we'll throw up a new building here or a new bridge over there, some pavement down over there. So why don't we just continue along with this little arrangement, because, as you already know, we are really awesome at violence. And if you don't agree, we can still just kill you. Remember, like how we used to do. I know this all sounds sick, but these kinds of people are out there, libertarians. You're going to have to face that. You know what else? If they were really clever, they would scare the people into compliance. Not with their own violence all the time, but they could actually threaten the people with the violence of other gangs. They could say, hey, yeah, we might be violent, but guess what? We're not the most violent gang out there. A couple towns away, there's an even more violent gang. And if we weren't here, they would come here and kill all of you. We're actually protecting you from them, so you're welcome. And once you bring the emotion of fear into it, it's over. People wouldn't be able to reason anymore, and this gang would now be there for good. Now, at this point, again, the libertarian chimes in and says, people are smarter than that. And sooner or later, somebody would stand up, if not many people, somebody would stand up and say, this is insulting. This is bribery. I don't want to live like this. I don't want to be robbed in exchange for little petty favors that could probably just as easily, if we put some thought into it, be done by the community. And I don't want to accept all of this robbery and threats just because of some scare story about some other violent gang that could come here. There's a violent gang already here. And the people would agree, and there would be an uprising, and that would be the end of it, says the libertarian. But I got some bad news. These groups of predators, the existence of which has apparently never even occurred to people who want to live in some kind of libertarian utopia, they've got one more trick up their sleeve in the worst case scenario, and this one is a doozy. Now, for this last one, you'll have to bear with me because this sounds so ridiculous and far-fetched. I'm not even exactly sure how this would come to be. But imagine this. The thugs somehow convince the people to surrender control of the channels of information, communication, and education to the gang itself. Again, I don't know how that happens, but in the worst case scenario, you have to think that it could be possible. Maybe they go after the children. Yeah, they bribe parents. People are already used to bribes with free daycare. I know it doesn't sound like something that good people would allow to happen, but if enough time had passed, these people would have become pretty habituated to dependence on the gang. As daycare becomes more sophisticated and better funded, the children are forced to stay there longer and longer. They are fed a new language and subsequently a new way of thinking about the predators. Instead of describing the relationship accurately with words like theft and threats, they're given new words that distort reality. First couple generations, it might be tough, but after that, the kids would come home, they would complain, they would talk about how terrible it is, they would talk about how much it sucks, and the parents could just dismiss it by saying something like, hey, we all have to do it. And even though this worst-case scenario, I admit, is very far-fetched, the libertarians at this point would have to admit that within a generation or two, the violent predators would have no more significant problems managing their herds of peaceful and productive people. They might have to deal with the occasional rogue who questions their authority or their legitimacy, but probably not even directly. After a while, the indoctrinated people would do that for them. They would say, without the violent gang, and it wouldn't be called that anymore, they would have thought of a new name for it, who would maintain order? Who would take care of the children? Who would protect us from violent people who want to do us harm? Who would keep our food supply safe? As my worst-case scenario vision of this anarchistic world grows even darker, other groups of thugs recognize the success that this gang has had, and they copy that model. It is replicated all over the world. Even as their control over the people stabilized, the gangs would still be plenty violent. They would fight with each other. Here's a really sad thing. Because of the messages that all the people were absorbing in daycare, they would actually cheer when the gang that preys on them slaughters a group of people that another gang preys on. It could get that bad. But if this got bad enough and continued long enough, the entire world would just become divided up into these gang territories. And at this most tragic ending, a good person, a hardworking and peaceful person who just wanted to live his or her life free of coercion, would realize that there is no place on earth that they could go. The end.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in. Username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All, and I am your host, David Bourne, coming back to you from live tonight. If you are listening at 8:07 Pacific on this Tuesday, May 30th. Tonight we're talking about the views of the show, if you're just tuning in detail regarding government, and really what the main goal and purpose of the show is about, going into the details of the views about government and what it really is. And then as I was talking about earlier, all the other things that we talk about, whether it's a specific issue or corruption or a false flag or whatever, kind of stem from there. But we kind of left off at talking, we talked about the U.S. and their kind of empire, but and made it clear that my issue is with government itself and about the institution of government, that governments are gangs and mafias and extortionists, and all governments are. It is not just the U.S. government. So, I would personally define government as an organization that rules over people, rules over and controls people via, or let me take a step back. A ruling elite, essentially, or a ruling class that rules over and controls people without consent via threat of force, if I had to And that's kind of what I say at the beginning of the show when I talk about, what we're about and the basic mission statement or philosophy of the show, or what we're really trying to do. And part of it, is exposing government or exposing corruption, because I think that helps to get people to thinking. But as I talked about earlier, the problem is that most people don't go back to or come to the conclusion that it is the institution of government, and that no matter who's in there, you're going to get the same thing. The parties are the same. They both want to control you. They try to pretend like on some different issues that are meaningless, they differ, but it's just they differ maybe on how they want to rule you, but they both want to rule over you. It's all a big sham. It's like wrestling, and people have talked about that in the past, where you have the good guys and the bad guys that supposedly hate each other, but it's all acting. Talking about wrestling. But the government really is all about control. And if you look up a definition of government, you will see in every definition of government, control. Because if you think about what a government is, that's exactly what it is. Keeping people in order, controlling their lives, passing laws to tell people how to live or they'll be punished. They're like parents, essentially. They're the ruling force over you. And the majority of people, I think, are totally under this illusion that they have some kind of say in government, especially in the U.S. Now, in other countries, they might not be under that same illusion, and that goes back to what I mentioned earlier of the way that the U.S. has done things over generations in a way that isn't blatant in your face takeover. It's over years and decades and centuries, really, that the takeover has taken place. And I guess that says something about the Constitution in a sense. But I think, you even look at that, and they had the Articles of Confederation, and then they threw that out. You could say they overthrew the government in a way, supposedly. I guess some things are revisionist history, or not really revisionist history, but interpretations of history. But the way they did it was kind of shady, and they did it so the federal government would have more power. That was about power and control. So essentially, they did that from the beginning, I believe. So when it comes to, we'll get to the U.S. government specifically, but government in general is all about control. And the issue is not who is in power and whether, we have a good person in power and they'll do good things for us. Well, what about when the bad person's in there? And it's choice. It's what's good for one person, or what one person looks at it as good for them doesn't mean it's good for somebody else. It's like, people think that, people don't know enough or follow things enough to vote the right way or vote the right people. No, some of them do, and they want socialism. Now, I think part of that is because they've been indoctrinated and brainwashed, but some of it, that's what they want. So to say that, if you had educated voters and they knew the whole truth and whatever, it doesn't mean that they'd vote for freedom. And it's a contradiction. If you have somebody ruling your life, and that's what you have, how can you have freedom at the same time? How? And I know that, there was a debate between, I was thinking of this during the break because something that was said, Jan Helfield or something, and Larkin Rose. And Jan Helfield, who comes off like an annoying douchebag, but I don't know, he could be a nice guy. But in that debate, at least, he did. And, he brings up this whole thing of, well, you need government to protect your freedoms because what if China, there was no government in China said, well, if you don't give us all your stuff or your rule, your state or your town over to us to rule, we're going to drop a nuclear bomb. And that's exactly what was in Brett Venat's YouTube video was, well, we'll protect you from the other gangs. There's these worse gangs over here. And that's just an ignorant statement because although I don't remember what Larkin Rose's response is. I think it was that people could fight back or whatever. But the point to me is, why would they even do that? Is the point. And the whole thing is, there's plenty of countries right now that don't have nuclear weapons. So what's to stop any country from doing that? Well, you also have other countries that would stop them, So it's just an asinine fucking response. It gives no. It's not a valid. I think. Comment's not the word I'm looking for, but a valid argument as to why there shouldn't be a government, and I'll get to my thoughts on that. But I don't believe, although some people think that the majority of people want to be ruled. But that's irrelevant. If your opinion is that people want to be ruled, let them make that choice. Because I know I don't want to be ruled over. No one has a choice. How do you fucking know if they want to be ruled? Because you just think that? And that was a statement made on my show. But how do you know that? And I even said, okay, history kind of shows that. But does it really? Because people didn't rebel because maybe they were scared or whatever, and thinking about it, you could say that, well, history kind of shows that maybe people have. But part of that is programming as well, because governments always come up or whatever, that means that, all people want to be ruled. No, they're kind of used to these are the way things are, and it's hard for them to break out of that. So I don't necessarily think the majority of people want to be ruled. Now, there's a difference between saying that and, what your actions show. But even if the majority of people didn't want to be ruled, what would they do about it? And yes, Larkin Rose did a thing called the tiny dot where he showed, government's this little dot and the rest of society is, huge. And they could do something about it. But it's not as easy as you think, and people are scared. People feel comfortable, and that's the other thing that the U.S. has done is, people feel like they have a lot to lose. They feel comfortable in their little jobs, and they're scared of something happening to their family, and they're put into it's a whole system. It's not just government. Government has designed, and this is my opinion, but I believe that government contributes to everything, the whole design of society. And there's a lot to be said about that, I think, information-wise, but you can prove it in certain aspects, the media being one of them. There's, unclassified documents that show that the government is involved in controlling the media. So, I mean, that being, of course, the biggest thing, but just everything, the whole system that people live by or feel they're expected, or societal norms, or all of that, I believe, is dictated by government in some form. It might not be directly, it might be via media or via corporations or media is basically a bunch of corporations, but it's ultimately, I believe it's dictated by government, which again is all about control and power. It's an institution whose goal is to get as much power and control as possible. That's what government exists for. There's no other reason for government to exist. Now, what they'll tell you is to protect your freedoms, which is funny because they do the opposite and take them away. But somehow people think that government protects your freedoms. Somehow. How, I have no idea. It's a bunch of bullshit. It's another one of those lines that people say. And it's funny because it's like they're all programmed. It's like they all say the same thing. The people that believe in this bullshit. So, when you look at authority and government authority, government somehow says, including their agencies, like the police will say, I have the right to do this by this state, or that, this city, or whatever bullshit that they say. But people believe somehow that government has some kind of authority. And they don't. Because a bunch of people, even a bunch, a select few of people got together, and every government that exists was formed by a select few people. The elite people of that country, or the rich of that country, or, I don't know the history of every fucking government out there. But it's always been the few that rule over the many, which makes no fucking sense. Supposedly, oh yes, but you have a vote. So you have one vote out of, for president, hundreds of millions of people, out of your representatives and senators, depending what state you live in. It could be, 20 million people or 30 million people if you live in like Texas or California for Senate. But I mean, it's still for the federal government at minimum, I think like 300,000 for representatives is equal no matter where you are. At least it should be. I think it's around like 300,000 or something. And the Senate, of course, is, depends on the state. So if you live in a smaller state, then, it's less votes. But no matter what, it's one fucking vote. How does one vote do anything? And, you only have so much power to go out and get people to vote a certain way. It's all controlled. It's all, unless you're a multimillionaire or a billionaire or one of these elite people, you don't have any control. You don't have any power. You can't get anything done as far as the law unless you're one of these people. Try doing it. Try doing it even you take Las Vegas and Clark County, and they're pretty much controlled by the federal government if you look at all the money they get. But even for the county commissioners, I mean, it's impossible merely impossible for you to really get something done. And if you do, it's a freak fucking thing, or somebody gets something that they think fits with the agenda that they're trying to push anyway, and it will be good for them, or it's just fucking coincidence or a fluke. But governments are not giving power to people or giving them the ability to decide their own lives. That's what government wants to do, and you see it going in that direction in the U.S. Other countries, it's way beyond that. In certain cases where countries have dictators. But the difference with a dictator is at least they're a fucking dictator, and that they're not giving you any power. In the U.S., they give you the illusion of power, and they've got, they have people that will attack you for attacking the government or attacking the military, and I don't mean physically attacking, I mean speaking out against them. People will attack you for it because they're so indoctrinated and brainwashed in this bullshit. But the government has no authority. What they have, the only thing that gives the government its power is a bunch of men with guns that obey orders. That's it. Nothing else. So you think about the example of the U.S. government. At the time after the revolution, I believe there was 7 million people. And how many people actually participated in the Constitution? I don't have the exact number of signatures, but that I'm thinking of Declaration of Independence. But probably about 1,000% of the people that lived in the colonies, or what became the states. And most of these founding fathers, actually all of them, were elites with a lot of money. I think that some of them actually did want freedom for everybody. Jefferson's the one that comes to mind. But really, they wanted the same thing, and it's so obvious. And who had power? White men that owned land. I mean, they didn't even have power, really. They just had power to, I believe, vote. And again, things were different then, but still, you still had hundreds of thousands of people voting for candidates. So they started at the starting point. And I believe even back then, the goal, and that's why they threw out the Articles of Confederation, because that starting point was too far back. So they needed, and this is all speculation in my opinion, and it's based on things I've read and whatever, and there's a lot of different opinions regarding this, but I believe that from the beginning, that's what it was. And it was something that over generations, that the ultimate goal was to take total control over everyone and everything. And that's the goal of government. And to do it in a way, because they didn't want the people to rise up. They wanted the people, like in 1984, they wanted the people to love their masters, to love their rulers. And like I was just saying, they get mad at people that speak out about government or the military or the police. A lot of these people. I'm surprised I don't stand for the national anthem. And I've only had somebody say something to me once, and I was a UNLV season ticket holder for a couple years. And I may get them this year, I'm not sure. But they kind of said something joking, and then, I gave them back I don't have to fucking stand if I don't want to. And then they kind of like shut the fuck up because I wasn't too nice about it. And they were, I forgot what they said. I think they said, when everybody else stands, that means you should stand. But they were like, like laughing, like kind of like it's a joke. And I'm like, I don't have to fucking stand if I don't want to for this fucking government or something. And the guy was just, he shut up. So, not that I'm looking for a fight or anything like that, because I'm not. And I'm not going to get in a fight over something like that. But I'm not going to stand if I don't want to. And this is way before Colin Kaepernick and all that shit. And it's a lot different because obviously I'm just a fan, at the game. I'm not a player. And my reasons weren't the same neither. They did have to do with the police killing people and violating their rights, but not with socialism and the manifesto or whatever you want to call it of Black Lives Matter, which is basically not really from Black Lives Matter. It's from fucking political operatives that want to push a socialist agenda. And if you read it, it's so obvious. It barely has anything to do with police. But a little aside before I continue with that is that the main goal or purpose of the show is, along with, getting this information out there about what government really is, the reason behind that is to achieve true freedom and liberty. At least let people know what it is. And that's really, if I, to summarize, it's to promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty and self-ownership. And the government does not own you, although they think they do. And they do a lot of things. We won't get into all the specifics, but they do a lot of things to show that they do. More and more laws are being passed, and they believe they own you. I mean, drugs is a perfect example. That you don't have the right to put what you want in your body. So they believe they own your body. Or prostitution. It's your body to sell. People sell their bodies all the time in other ways. Construction workers or anybody who does physical labor. What are they doing? They're selling their bodies, or you're selling your mind, or you're selling whatever skills you have. If your skill is sex, that's your fucking business, not the government's. And I think that's another concept that people don't understand. And it goes along with this in the sense of government has no right to do any of the things they do because you own yourself. You have the right to do whatever you want as long as you don't directly interfere with someone else's freedom or their property. So what that really means to me is that the government's laws not only violate your rights, they violate your freedoms. Just because something is a law doesn't mean it's not violating your rights, or it doesn't mean it's not violating your freedoms or your liberty. Almost every law does. I would say maybe 5% of the laws don't. I don't know. That's just a guess and an estimate. Who knows how many fucking laws there are at this point? It's you can't even fathom. The government doesn't even know how many laws there are. And that's just federal law. What if you take federal law and laws in every state? You know, so if there's a different law, a lot of the laws in the states are similar, but then if you account for every law that's different, or that's in this state but not in any other state, and you add those all together, and then local ordinances, and it's insane. But you're supposed to know the law, even though Supreme Court has ruled that cops don't have to know the law, that if they get the law wrong, that's okay as long as they had good intentions. And that's an actual case. There was a case in South Carolina where somebody was pulled over for a broken taillight. You can't be pulled over for a broken taillight in South Carolina, or maybe it was North Carolina. And then they found drugs in the car, so they arrested the person, and they brought it to the Supreme Court. And they said, even though the cop pulled you over illegally, he did it because he thought that it was the law, so he didn't have any ill intentions or something. So that's okay. But if you don't know the law, it doesn't matter. It's insane. And I could name so many fucking Supreme Court rulings or laws or whatever that are just crazy, or things that have been done that are insane, that make no sense. I mean, they make sense based on what I'm saying, that the government is about power and control, and they do whatever they want to do. If you're part of the club, you know, it's fine. Every once in a while, they got to throw somebody out there to show, hey, look, you know, not everybody gets away with everything if you're part of government or whatever. Or, you know, if somebody gets out of line, doesn't follow what they want them to follow, you know, all of those things come into play as well. But the bottom line is, and I think it all starts from here, and then that's where, when you look at government, it's easier to see these things, is from self-ownership, and that you own yourself. Nobody else owns you. Not your parents, not the government, nobody. And you as a human being have the right to live your life the way you want. And that's where, you know, as long as you don't directly interfere with somebody else's freedom, which means, you know, you don't just go and hit somebody or kill somebody or steal their property, you can do whatever you want. But there's thousands, if not millions, of laws that violate that. And that's violating, they talk about human rights violations. They're talking about something totally different. In some cases, it's the same thing. But a lot of it is they're talking about negative freedoms and negative rights. Or sorry, positive rights. I always get them confused. Positive rights, like you have the right to health care. No, you don't, because the right to health care means you're forcing somebody else to do something for you. You don't have the right to force anybody to do anything for you. You know, you're not owed anything in this world except, and this is not owing because you're not owed these, but these rights of freedom and liberty, I call them true freedom and liberty because the words freedom and liberty get thrown around, but you have the only thing I believe that you have in this world that is a given is the right to true freedom and liberty, and to decide for yourself how to live your life and what to do with it. Again, as long as you don't, harm anybody else or their property or whatever. So when it comes to government and not believing in government, I don't think if government didn't exist, there would be some utopia. I don't think there is any utopia. There's no right or wrong. There's just opinion. But government is government. To me, it doesn't matter what form of government, whether, in democracy, all it means is majority rules. It's funny when they talk about, we want to bring, I can't do Donald Trump, so you have to go back to the last president. We want to bring democracy to all these countries in the Middle East. And, well, you just want to bring majority rule. So if they all want to rule, if the majority wants to stone women to death for cheating on their husbands, and I'm just using that as an example, I'm not saying they do, but that is how is that a good thing? Democracy in itself is not a positive thing. Majority ruling, because the majority doesn't have the right to decide things for you. That's the whole point. There is no good form of government because government is not an institution that is good. Government is not an institution that is for the people or by the people. It's by people, but not the unelected majority. So I don't believe in having some revolution to overthrow the government. And I've said this before, because then you just get another government. And the problem, and this is where, and I'll talk about this later in the week, this is where these so-called revolutionaries, or a lot of these people protesting now, they just want a different government. They want government to do different things. They're not anti-government or anti-government power or any of that, or they want government to have less power or police to have less power. They just want them to have more power in some ways, because they want to take from a lot of these groups are more socialist and communist groups. So they want to force people to do different things, but it's all force. All governments are force. So it's all the same shit. Again, there's different levels of freedom, and depending on where you are, even in states, like I would say, at least for the time being, although it seems like it's going in a bad direction, but the state of Nevada has a higher level of freedom than the state of Massachusetts or the state of California. However, it's still not free. It's just, I shouldn't even say freer. I should say it's less, I got to come up with a word for that, or a saying for that. Like it's less, not less socialist, although that's part of it, but it's, you have a higher level of rights, even though you still aren't free. I don't know. I need to come up with a better saying, but I think people understand what I'm trying to say is that, you know, or in the United States compared to some other countries, the same thing where you have a higher level of freedom. However, again, that is very rapidly decreasing, which was what I believe the plan from the beginning. So, I don't believe in any revolution or civil war or even really eliminating the government. I just want them to leave me the fuck alone, and people that want to be left alone, that don't want to comply with their bullshit and don't want to be, you know, and I think some people think that means if there's no government, and I'm thinking of somebody specific that I know, or, you know, used to call in the show, that they think like government's the reason that we have a high standard of living or things like that. And that has nothing to do with government. I think it's the opposite. I think government actually holds people back. Things like patents and on ridiculous stuff and copyrights and regulations, and not being able to start your own business because the barriers to entry are so high. So you can have an organized society, you can have a free society without government, but you can't have one with one. It doesn't work. Even if all you had in your governing document was what I just said, that the only time government got involved was when you know, directly interfere with somebody else's freedom. And that would not stay that way, because they'd add something else and something else. Of course, it would take longer to take total control, but eventually the same thing would happen, because it's just a piece of paper. And I had mentioned the only way to somehow have checks and balances, because you can't have checks and balances in government. It's all government. Government does not check itself. They're all part of government. But would be, being that the government is based on force and based on violence, and the threat of violence would be if the people were as armed as the government, or at least as the police, that would be the only way you could have some kind of check and balance. But that wouldn't last, because the government wouldn't allow it to last, because they'd want to get the upper hand. But that would be the only way to have some sort of check and balance on the government, in my opinion, that you could enforce. Because you're going to the root. You're going to what gives government its authority, what allows government to get away with their laws, but not allow us to get away with breaking the bullshit laws, like possessing things that they say you can't put in your body. So what I believe in, and I've talked about this, and I even have a Facebook page for it, and all that information, again, is at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. It has a link to the Facebook page. And I don't have that many likes, nothing compared to, I think it was only 15 likes, and on my other page it was like 400 and something, although it slowly went down. I was going up, and then all of a sudden I was kind of staying at the same number because I was losing people and gaining people and losing people and gaining people. But it's like people are straight up scared of this page or something, because I say the page is even called this, and I explain that I believe in non-compliance and self-defense. So that meaning you don't have to comply with anything that violates your rights based on natural law being what I had just said, that as long as you don't directly interfere with somebody else's freedom. So if somebody violates your rights under natural law, you have the right to defend yourself against anyone, including government agents. And that's what I believe. Now, this makes the majority of people that are in prison political prisoners, and they are. And cops are, just part of the gang. And they're kidnappers. That's what they are. Now, most people comply because they know that the government has an army of law enforcement officers, and they have a literal army of the military and all of these weapons, and now the police have automatic weapons and tanks and all of these things. So people pretty much know that if they defend themselves against something that they have the right to defend themselves against, that they have the chance of ending up dead or in jail, which is ridiculous. And how is that not tyranny? Now, I would say that government in itself is tyranny, is tyrannical, the definition of government. But even if you don't believe that, I mean, how can you say that you have freedom when you don't have the freedom to put something you want in your body, that you can't choose to put what you want in your body? And that's just one example. There's so many other things. I always like to use that example because it's the easiest one to explain and understand. But there's another example, like this doesn't apply now, but Cuban cigars were illegal. Why? Because the U.S. had an embargo with Cuba. Did you do something wrong because you possessed Cuban cigars? Does possessing anything violate it violates laws, but does possessing anything not violate your rights? Or let me rephrase that. If you are arrested or government agents come after you for possession of anything, is that not a violation of your rights? And it is, because you have the right to possess what you want. I don't give a fuck what it is. And I know a lot of people would disagree with me. I think all gun laws violate your rights. And they even violate the Constitution. It doesn't say background checks, and and it's that's arguable. You can argue the Second Amendment, but to me, all that's irrelevant because all that is a right. It's your right as a human being. It's your right to possess what you want. Not only that, is self-defense is a basic right to defend your property, to defend your family, to defend yourself from bodily harm. So I'm going to end on this clip from, I've played it before, but it's a really good clip describing government with the alien that comes down and asks about government. If I can find it here, it's called Government Explained. And maybe I can't find it. I know I have it. I think it's just not oh, there it is. So thanks everybody for listening, and we should at least for the next few weeks be on at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, Monday through Thursday. So I hope everybody will tune in, and I appreciate everybody listening. Remember to check out nonpartisanlibertyforall.com.
Hey, an alien. Yes, I've travelled across space to check on the progress of your species. Cool. Shall I take you to our leader? Your what? Our leader, the guy in charge. The guy in charge of what? Well, in charge of everything. You have one guy in charge of everything? No, he's in charge of government. What is government? Well, government makes the rules for us. It tells us what we can do and what we can't do. So is government really smart? They come up with wise rules for you to follow? Well, mostly. But some of its rules are really stupid. Do you disregard those rules? No, we have to follow the rules, even if they are stupid or we disagree with them. Government punishes anyone who disobeys the rules. So you are slaves to government? No, it's not like that at all. Government works for us, the people. It serves us. We're the boss. It tells you what to do, and it punishes you with violence if you disobey it, and yet you're its boss? Yeah. But there are some things government does that you don't like. Well, yeah, not everything government does is popular, like spending on wars, for example. What is a war? It's when government basically spends the people's money on weapons and soldiers and then sends them over to the other side of the world to kill a bunch of people over there and destroy their country. I don't like it that government does this. Well, I can see why you might not like that. Have you humans reached the stage where you generally consider stealing, enslaving, and killing each other to be bad things? Oh yeah, we know that. Don't steal, don't attack, don't assault. But you give money to government and they use it to kill people. Well, yeah. But government does good things with tax money as well. Why don't you stop paying for the things you don't like and only pay for the good things it does? No, we can't do that. You can't just decide to stop paying taxes because the rules say that everyone has to pay taxes. But the rules come from government though, don't they? Yeah. So government made a rule which says that everyone has to pay them money. So everyone pays taxes because if they didn't, government would punish them using violence? Well, yes, but most people don't mind paying taxes. Most people feel obligated to pay taxes and...
We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just